Hey everybody, a video today on the Cathars, and in case you haven't heard of the Cathars, since I've talked about the Knights Templar and a possible treasure or knowledge that they held out of ancient Egypt that was threatening to the church, I needed to talk about the Cathars because their story is similar. They are an ancient religious sect, and I'm going to talk about kind of what they were all about in a little bit here, but they held it seems to me a great secret that the church found very threatening also, and there is a great legend or myth surrounding the Cathars that they held a great treasure. And a lot of times myths and fables and stories there's some actual, they are rooted in actual history, and this is just a possibility, but it's a legend and it's a story, and it has to do with the Knights Templar also. But basically the story is the Cathars had a treasure or a secret, something that was very threatening to the church, and basically there was an inquisition started in 1233 against the Cathars, and by 1243 the few remaining Cathars that had not been rounded up yet had retreated to the mountain top fortress of Montsegur, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but I don't care. But this is Montsegur, and this was featured on the Oak Island show on the History Channel, I believe, but there's a very strong legend that comes out of here. But this is what it looks like, and this is the view. It's a pretty cool looking place, but this is where some of their most noble knights and loyal supporters and the few remaining Cathars ended up. And this is basically where the group that had been around for 1,000 years, maybe rooted in Egypt. Their teachings were certainly rooted in Egypt. I'm not going to talk about that, but this is where it basically all came to an end. And I just want to take you into what it looks like here. And somebody did some nice panoramic shots up here, and I will leave the link for that person below. But I want to take you right into Montsegur and what it looks like. And this would have been a good place to try to make your last stand, I guess, as a group that had been around for 100 years, or a religious sect, or whatever you want to call it. But this is what it looked like at the top of Montsegur. And over these cliffs, the legend has it, is where a great treasure escaped in 1243. And I just want to talk a little bit about the Cathars now, and I'm going to go to a few websites, but this is the view from the top of Montsegur, where the Cathars, where it all came to an end. And I want to skip over to this website. One of the things that is kind of a recurring themes when people write about the Cathars is that they were kind of a satanic devil-worshipping sect that had weird rituals, and it's kind of hard to separate the fact and the fiction from those accusations because it came from the church, and it's kind of hard to determine how much the church was trying to demonize the Cathars, because the Cathars held a very important secret that the church found very threatening, and that led to the Inquisition against them. And I found a couple things very interesting about the Cathars that maybe might relate it to the treasure, and I believe the treasure was where the Old Testament, the origin of the Bible, came from, the very thing that could threaten the church. But I think part of the reason people said the Cathars were devil worshippers is just simply because they recognized an old theology where dualism was important. They recognized the good and the evil. They recognized the dark and the light as being, two important things for balance. And just because they recognized the evil or the dark side along with the light and the good, the church accused them of being satanic and devil worshippers, which is kind of ridiculous. But I think the knowledge that the Cathars held that the church didn't like is they knew where the Old Testament comes from, and this website says this. It says the Cathars considered themselves Christians, but rejected the Old Testament and the vengeful and angry God described within it. It says, however, Such values as the Ten Commandments of the Old Testament were espoused by the Cathars. And I just think that they practice a very old spirituality that came from ancient Egypt. I believe their origins were from Egypt, and they knew exactly where this spirituality came from, and it wasn't a filtered kind. It was the pure kind from very ancient Egypt, and maybe the ancient Egypt that we do not know, that is not written about in history. But it says this: the origin of the term Cathar is in dispute. Some link it to the Greek term Catharos, which I believe is the strongest possibility, and that simply means pure. And I think they knew the pure source of their religion. And on this site, it says this: despite St. Bernard's proclamation concerning the Cathars that no sermons are more Christian than theirs, and their morals are pure, Rome made every attempt in the Albigensian Crusade. God, I'm glad I don't have to say that word more than once. The Albigensian Crusade to exterminate the Cathars. When Pope Innocent III ordered a crusade, the goal was nothing less than to reduce the highest European culture of the Middle Ages to destitution and revel. In 1243, all major Cathar towns and bastions had fallen to the northern invaders, except for a handful of remote and isolated strongpoints. Chief among them was the majestic mountain citadel of Montsegur, poised like a celestial arc above the surrounding valleys. It says, on March 1, 1244, Montsegur finally capitulated. By then its defenders numbered less than 400. They were offered surprisingly lenient terms, but the defenders nevertheless requested a 2-week truce and a complete cessation of hostilities in order to consider the terms. And during this 2-week truce, I believe that they hatched a plan, and the legend is it on the last night of the truce that 4 men with a guide made a daring escape over the edge of this mountain fortress. And the story is, and it's pretty well documented, that 4 of the strongest or most able went over the edge here at Montsegur and carried with them this secret knowledge or treasure. And you aren't going to go over the edge with the Ark of the Covenant on your back, but you can go over the edge with maybe papyrus or maybe a tablet. And that story is well documented, and I find it fascinating. And legend has it that whatever it was ended up in the hands of the Knights Templar, and this is the source of one of the Templar treasures. They were not directly associated with the Cathars. Just through my reading, that's what I've come to believe. But they were heavy sympathizers with them, and I believe they might have given them refuge and might have ended up with one of the Cathar treasures. But one of the interesting stories about the Cathars, and kind of one of their strange rituals, is that the stories are they were practicing a certain way of dying. Like there was a certain ritual that you needed to go through to die the proper way. And I found that very interesting because I made an upload about the ancient texts of Thoth, the Emerald Tablets to be specific, and he has a section in there where he talks about the exact way to pass away. And I have a video here, and I will leave that link below. So I found that story about the Cathars incredibly strange, especially when you figure, or when the story is that they have ancient knowledge, the origin maybe of Christianity, that it came from a Christianity that was practiced in Egypt a long time ago, a long time before anybody named Jesus was supposedly born. So I found that a fascinating connection to the Emerald Tablets. But Montsegur, now we're going to go to a story from about a little less than 100 years ago. And this here is Otto Rahn, and I find his story quite fascinating. Part of his real-life story was taken as the basis for the Indiana Jones character, and his story ties in some true history of the Nazis actually looking for a great treasure during World War II. I've already talked about Mussolini's troops walking into Aksum, Ethiopia, during World War II and looking for the Ark of the Covenant and taking an obelisk out of there and taking it back to Rome. I'm going to jump over to this site. I will leave these links below. I'm just going to read part of this. It says, poet, mystic, and Nazi researcher, Rahn was obsessed with two ideas, the Holy Grail and the Cathars. In 1929, he made a special trip and he began excavating at Montsegur, the last Cathar stronghold to fall in the Inquisition. Legend had it that the Cathars had a great treasure which was never found, but hidden deep in the mountainside. And the Cathars had built plenty of secret places at Montsegur. It says Rahn was convinced that this treasure was the Holy Grail and he intended to find it. Rahn's research resulted in a book called Crusade Against the Grail, published in 1933. It says all of which brought him to the attention of occult nut Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS. Himmler was obsessed with the occult and particular interest in the Grail. His castle at Wolfsburg was intended as an SS Camelot/Avalon, where the honorable dead's ashes would sit in 12 urns on stone pillars around a center where the Grail would sit. It says, however, in 1937, Otto Rahn fell into disgrace, possibly for disciplinary reasons, though it is not clear. He was sent on duty at an SS camp in Dachau, and in 1938 he requested dismissal from the SS. It says he spoke out openly against the war, and this might have been the reason for his relocation to Dachau in the first place. More likely, though, were rumors of homosexuality, which of course were verboten. Not long afterwards, Rahn was found dead, frozen on a mountainside. It is generally thought to have been a suicide, though conspiracy theorists believe he was murdered by the SS in order to silence him about the secrets of the Grail. As a side note, there is a rumor and stories that Rahn found a great treasure and brought it to Wolfsburg, where it stayed until the end of the war. Others say that no Grail made it, but that a large quartz crystal was found instead. And it says it is worth pointing out that other stories describe the Grail not as a cup, but as a stone, though in this case, an emerald. So, was the Cathar treasure possibly the emerald tablets? We have the strange story of the Cathars practicing this certain way of dying, which is exactly described in the emerald tablets. We have stories of them taking a great treasure that could threaten the church, and the emerald tablets would certainly threaten the church, because that was kind of the origin of where Christianity evolved from. And I don't know. We have some very interesting tales of the Grail not being a cup, but of a large quartz crystal, emerald and colored. And this ties the Nazis into a search for some great treasure during World War II. I find this all very fascinating. I've talked about the Knights Templars, so I thought I'd talk about the Cathars and their possible treasure from Egypt, which very well could have been the emerald tablets, the way they were described. So I just hope you thought this was interesting. Have a nice night.